Online harassment and abuse of women is pervasive, it goes unchecked, and it must be stopped. Or so we're told by the media and feminist cry bullies such as these two that took this horrible injustice all the way to the United Nations and produced a damning report. Unfortunately, it hit a little snag and had to be retracted. But still, it's not like feminists to let facts get in the way of a good narrative, and so it continues. But the problem with this narrative is that the facts keep accumulating that women aren't receiving a disproportionate share of online abuse, and possibly not even half of it. Now, if you think about the type of people that are consistently in the public eye, whose every word is put under the microscope, politicians would be close to the top of the list, particularly during election campaigns. And so, with the Australian federal election campaign now over, The Guardian Online took a look at online abuse of politicians from March 24th until July 1st, which covers the entire election campaign and the month leading up to it. And it turns out the person who got the most abuse was a male, and that coalition politicians, for non-Australians, coalition describes conservative politicians, receive most of the abuse. But it gets even better. Of the top 20 politicians receiving online abuse, not a single woman. Now, of course, there are less women in the lower house of Parliament. Before the current election, women made up 27% of MPs. So that would mean if online abuse were roughly equal for both men and women, then you would expect 5 or 6 women in the top 20. But not even one appeared. But don't fear, the authors of this article still managed to make women the victim of the story. They went on to document the abuse of female journalists, in particular Lee Sales of the ABC, who had received disgusting, sexist, and relentless abuse, although we don't know to what extent, since there were no actual figures on that, just anecdotes. And so a news story about online abuse of politicians that was solely men turned out to be mainly about the abuse of female journalists. And as you can see here, the amount of space devoted in this story to male politicians on the left compared to female journalists on the right. But who's really surprised? Because that's the world we live in. An injustice is an injustice if it's done to women. But if it's men on the receiving end, who cares? So why is it when the same thing happens to women that regularly happens to men, it's suddenly a national emergency? Well, there's a few explanations. Firstly, our societies have traditionally sought to protect women. Secondly, feminist cry bullies and their social justice surrogates use victimhood as a currency to censor, ban, and generally impose their authoritarian ideology. And thirdly, women tend to complain more. They generally don't cope with confrontation as well and take things more personally. Now, before you accuse me of being sexist, this is borne out by the Pew Research data from their extensive online harassment survey published in 2014. In Part 4, titled The Aftermath of Online Harassment. Among those that have experienced online harassment and who found their most recent experience upsetting, respondents were given the following 5 choices to indicate the level of upset they suffered. Now, what I did is group the 2 responses at both ends together and look at those by gender. And when you do that, you see the following. More than double the number of women found their most recent experience of online harassment extremely or very upsetting compared to men. And at the opposite end, almost 2/3 of men found their most recent experience a little or not at all upsetting compared to 38% of women. So even though this survey found that men receive slightly more harassment online, they don't get as upset about it as women do. So what to do with this information? Well, the cry bullies want to censor, ban, or shut down any content they deem to be harassment. But where does that course of action lead? Well, it leads directly to the infantilization of women, and such wonderful ideas as banning certain billboards so neurotic fatties can feel comfortable on public transport. And how about this latest denial of reality? Mirrors are being removed from changing rooms in some of Britain's biggest shopping centres after new research revealed they make customers more body conscious. Quote, almost 3/4 of British women, 71%, are put off buying clothes after they've tried them on in front of a changing room mirror, a survey found. More than half of women, 52%, are left feeling down after seeing themselves in the mirror, the research discovered. And so the answer is, deny reality and get rid of the mirrors. But you need to ask yourself, is the fault with the mirrors or the people looking into them? Now, I don't think these shops are primarily focused on protecting fragile egos. They're just trying to sell more clothes. But think of the implications of this. Rather than actually get yourself into shape so that you look good when you try clothes on, you only need to imagine you look good. But it's hard to believe that you can avoid reflections of yourself wherever you go. What are we going to do? Ban glass? And how many more men are going to be subjected to the inevitable question, does this outfit make me look fat? But more importantly, what is this sort of infantilization doing to younger generations of women? Well, according to Claire Fox, director of the Institute of Ideas, young women can't cope with any ideas that challenge their right-on view of the world. In this article, the author describes young girls' reactions to a discussion about rape in light of the release from prison of then convicted rapist and high-profile footballer Ched Evans, who it must be said has since had his conviction quashed and is awaiting a retrial. When she suggested rape wasn't the worst thing that could happen to a woman, quote, some of the girls were sobbing and hugging each other while others shrieked. The majority appeared, at the very least, shell-shocked. She goes on to say, quote, it illustrated this generation's almost belligerent sense of entitlement. They assume their emotional suffering takes precedence. Express a view they disagree with, and you must immediately recant and apologize. But as I argue in my new book, I find that offensive. Generation Snowflake believe it's their right to be protected from anything they might find unpalatable. This mindset is particularly rife in universities. And she goes on to document a litany of ridiculous goings-on at universities in recent times and in the public school system. And you can read more about that in the article linked below. But I just want to read a few quotes at the end of the article. Quote, there is a strand of self-absorption and fragility running through this generation, all too ready to cry victim at the first hint of a situation they don't like. We need a younger generation that's prepared to grow a backbone, go out into the world, take risks, and make difficult decisions. Otherwise, the future doesn't bode well for any of us. Now, isn't that a clarion call for the current age?